All right, I'm going to take off your bandages now.
Saying that, the doctor began unwrapping the bandages around my husband's eyes. My husband had barely been able to see. A few days ago, he had finally decided to undergo a corneal transplant. And today, for the first time in a long while, he would be able to see something. My husband had already had low vision when he met me. I wanted his first sight to be my face. When all the bandages were removed, he blinked several times as if the light was too bright for him. Then he lifted his head and looked in my direction. "Can you see my face?"
You're my wife?
he muttered, and tears began to fall from his eyes. I was so happy to see him shed tears of emotion when he saw my face. I interpreted it that way, but I quickly realized my husband's tears were for a different reason.
No way. How could this happen? You're my wife? This is awful. It's too cruel. You tricked me. You're hideous.
The shock was so overwhelming that I don't remember how I left the hospital or how I got home. My name is Nancy Hanks, and I'm a single woman in my 20s who is way too comfortable living at home to ever move out on my own. I graduated college and I'm in my third year as a working professional, but I have no plans to live by myself.
I wish you'd get married and move out soon.
That's what my mom often says, but it's hard to give up a lifestyle where meals and laundry are done for me. Living at my parents' home helps me save money for the future since I don't have any big expenses, and I don't have any friends or a boyfriend to invite over anyway. From my point of view, there's no reason to leave. I'm the typical person who hasn't become independent from their parents, just like anyone else. But little by little, my life started to change. One day, I was waiting for the train to head to work at the station platform. It was a normal weekday, nothing different from usual, standing in line with the same people at the same train door. But that day, I saw something unusual. There was a man in a suit on all fours, searching for something. At first, I thought he must have dropped his contact lens. You see that sometimes. Maybe he overslept and was rushing to work. But even so, something about his movement seemed off. He was carefully feeling the ground and the walls, moving slowly and stretching out his hand as far as he could, trying to find something. His suit's knees and hems were stained white from crawling around like that. Would anyone go to such lengths just for a contact lens? It was almost as if he couldn't see anything. That thought made me scan the area around him quickly, and I soon found what I had expected. The white cane the man was looking for. I picked it up, feeling frustrated. It was early morning at the station. There weren't that few people around. Yet, despite the fact that someone was clearly struggling, no one bothered to say a word. Since when did people become such cold-hearted beings? While I fumed at the world and at myself, I made my way to the man searching for his cane. "Excuse me." I spoke to him in a low voice, trying not to startle him. But even then, it seemed I wasn't careful enough, as he flinched and raised his voice.
Yes.
His response was louder than I had anticipated, which startled me as well. In a slight panic, I hurriedly tried to explain the situation. "I just found this. No, I mean, your cane," I said, holding out the cane. The man hesitantly reached out toward me, so I moved the handle closer to him. When he finally grasped it, his face lit up.
Thank you so much. I was really in a blind. It's dangerous to move too much in a station like this, but without my cane, it's hard to get around.
As I watched him thank me with a smile, I thought, wow, he's really good looking. I hadn't noticed before since he had been looking down, but he had a remarkably handsome face. Even though he couldn't see, I bet he was quite popular, I mused, when suddenly his voice broke my thoughts.
Are you okay?
It seemed I had been so caught up in analyzing him that I missed part of what he was saying. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking about something. So, where are you headed after this? Before I realized it, I had asked him that question. I didn't know where he was headed, but if it was somewhere nearby, I thought I'd go with him. He might drop his cane again, or maybe he wouldn't make it to his destination safely. The man seemed a little surprised at first, but then he started talking, as if understanding the context.
Actually, I was trying to get to work, but the train was so crowded that I missed my stop. I got off at the next station, but in my rush, I dropped my cane, and well, here I am.
As I listened to him explain, I realized his office was on my way to work. In that case, let me walk you to your office. It seems to be on my way. At first, he hesitated, but it seemed he wasn't confident he could make it to the office on his own, so he eventually accepted my offer. On the way to his company, I learned a little more about him. His name was Dave, and he had just started working at his company a few days ago. Apparently, he had trouble finding a job because of his poor eyesight. I see, unlike me who grew up comfortably, he's probably been through a lot of challenges. Not that I can fully understand, but I could imagine some of it. If I was able to help someone like Dave, maybe I'm not so bad after all. I thought about that as we got close to his office.
Thank you so much for today. Because of you, I might actually make it to work on time. Will you be okay getting to your company, Nancy?
When he asked, I replied, I'll be fine. To be honest, I was probably going to be about 10 minutes late, but I wasn't foolish enough to admit that. Well then, good luck with your work. Just as I was about to leave, he called out.
Wait,
Dave raised his voice again, probably not knowing how far away I had gotten. I was a little self-conscious about people staring, but I couldn't just walk away, so I turned back.
well, if it's not too much trouble, could we exchange contact information? You really helped me today, and I'd like to thank you properly sometime.
I didn't think I had done anything significant. In fact, if I said it out loud, it might sound conceited, but helping him gave me a sense of self-worth and satisfaction. So, I didn't feel I needed to be thanked for it. But in moments like this, I can never refuse. I always worry that refusing will hurt the other person's feelings, or that they might think, does she think I'm hitting on her? How full of herself is she? I overthink things, and so I ended up exchanging our contact information. Sure, that's fine. Looking back, it wasn't the wrong decision. Later, Dave and I met for coffee. During that time, he gave me some fancy sweets as a thank you gift. So, I felt like I had to return the favor, and we met for coffee again. As we continued meeting like this, we grew closer. Through our conversations, I learned that Dave had developed his vision problems later in life, and he was now waiting for his turn to have surgery.
I could see fine until I was a freshman in high school, but then my eyesight just started getting worse. Now I can only make out faint light. Well, they say I'll be able to see again after surgery, so I'm not too down about it.
Dave said with a forced smile. I'm sure he meant what he said, but I could still sense a certain sadness. To lose your sight, to not be able to do things that were once easy, The stress and fear must be unimaginable. However, seeing Dave face these challenges daily and never give up easily made me admire and respect him, and even start to develop feelings for him. Before I knew it, I had a growing desire to support him. Some might criticize it as cheap sympathy or the arrogance of being able bodied. But wanting to help someone who is doing their best to live isn't a bad thing, is it? And it turns out I wasn't the only one developing feelings. One day, after seeing Dave a few more times, he confessed his feelings to me.
I know that confessing to you when I can't see is probably just a burden for you, Nancy, but it's precisely because I can't see that I've come to realize how beautiful your heart is. So, I just had to tell you how I feel.
That's what he said to me. For Dave, it seemed more like he was confessing just to get it off his chest, expecting to be rejected. But as I said before, I already had feelings for him. So when I accepted his confession, he was more shocked than happy. That was one of the changes in my life. Another was that after starting my relationship with Dave, I moved out to live on my own. We did go out on dates sometimes, but I felt bad dragging him around everywhere. Besides, I wanted to save those experiences for after he regained his sight. So, most of our dates ended up being at home, but it felt awkward doing that at my parents' house. That's why I decided to leave my family home. We gradually fell into a semi-cohabitation routine, and about 6 months into our relationship, Dave proposed to me. That was a surprise for me too. I had started thinking more about marriage since we began living together. Is this what being a couple feels like? Between his confession and the proposal, it felt like Dave and I were completely in sync. With that in mind, I answered his proposal. I'd love to. However, a few months after we got married, I found myself facing a problem. It was Dave's changing behavior. Before we got married, despite being unable to see, Dave always did things for himself. In the beginning, out of concern and wanting to show how capable I was, I started doing everything for him. But since we both worked, that naturally started to become a burden for me. It also seemed that being overly protective was stressful for Dave too. According to him, once he memorized the layout of the house and furniture, getting around wasn't that difficult. Of course, suddenly rearranging the furniture or leaving things on the floor would be dangerous. But I was naturally neat, so that wasn't an issue. Because of that, Dave would take his dishes to the kitchen after meals, and he even helped bring in the laundry. However, lately, Dave hasn't been helping with anything at all. I had heard that men sometimes grow distant after getting married, but I never expected Dave to be one of them. Feeling a bit sad, I said to him, "If you're done eating, can you take the plates to the kitchen?" Then Dave said something shocking.
Why should I? It's more efficient for you, Nancy, since you can see to do it. After all, I'm visually impaired, basically blind. It's only natural that a healthy person like you should take care of me.
Dave would have never said something like this before we got married. I sighed as I cleared the dishes, thinking about how things had changed. And then my mom's words came to mind. I had called her for advice about Dave's attitude just a few days earlier.
Didn't I tell you so?
But that's exactly what my mom ended up saying.
I told you, didn't I? I said, why don't you wait to get married until Dave's eyes are healed? But you just said, we're already living together, so it's the same as being married. And now you're coming back to rely on us. You should try harder on your own.
Then she hung up. Sure enough, When we visited my parents to announce our marriage, my mom looked at me with worried eyes and said,
There's no need to rush.
I had ignored her advice, insisting on getting married anyway. As much as I wished she'd be a little more understanding, maybe this was just a sign that I hadn't fully learned to be independent. Still, I wanted to resolve things before my relationship with Dave got worse. After much thought, I decided to take a chance and seek help from someone else. One day, on a weekend, Dave and I were going about our day as usual. I was making lunch, and Dave had his earbuds in, listening to something as always. Once lunch was ready, we sat down to eat. Trying to sound as casual as possible, I started talking. Dave, I'm going grocery shopping for dinner after this, so could you bring in the laundry that's hanging in the bathroom while I'm out? Dave looked a little confused by my request. He retorted after a slight pause.
Why? You could just bring it in before you go shopping.
That won't work. It's not dry yet. Once again, Dave frowned, as if he sensed that something was off.
Then bring it in when you get back.
But if I do that, dinner will be late. And you don't like eating too late, right? You used to help me before we got married, so you can do it every now and then. Dave was about to snap back at me, but then seemed to realize what felt off.
More importantly, Nancy, aren't you being a little loud today? It's annoying, so could you?
Who do you think you are?
A sudden shout came from behind Dave. Dave flinched in surprise, but seemed to recognize the voice as he nervously opened his mouth.
Why are you here? Mom.
Yes, the person I had asked for help was Dave's mother, my mother-in-law. Let's go back to when we visited Dave's parents to introduce ourselves as a married couple. His parents were overjoyed that Dave had found someone to marry. It seemed they had thought that, given his eyesight, it would be a while before he could get married. At the same time, they were also worried about me. Since Dave's mom had been a stay-at-home mom, she had spent a lot of time with him. And she knew firsthand how challenging it was to live with someone who had a disability.
I raised Dave without treating him any differently than other kids his age. But even then, true equality is still just an ideal. There are inevitable challenges that come with his condition. If you ever feel unsure about anything in the future, don't hesitate to rely on me. Even if it's something like, Dave's not pulling his weight as a husband. Can you give him a pep talk? I'm here for you.
Before we left that day, she had said this to me quietly. So this time I asked for her help, meaning, give him a stern talking to because he's not pulling his weight as a husband. I had asked her to come over early in the morning and secretly observe Dave's behavior. Honestly, I felt guilty for tricking Dave like this, especially since he couldn't see, but my mother-in-law told me not to worry.
After all, he's been using his blindness as an excuse to slack off and rely on you, hasn't he? If that's the case, there's no harm in turning the tables on him.
Sure enough, Dave started voicing his complaints at me.
Are you one of those people who looks down on the disabled too?
But he was immediately scolded by his mom.
Be quiet. You always say you want to be treated equally when it's convenient, but the moment things get tough, you hide behind your disability. You've had that bad habit for years. What are you going to do if Nancy gets fed up with you and leaves? I hate to say this, but realistically, there aren't many people willing to marry someone with a disability. And it's hard to find a woman as kind and patient as Nancy.
As Dave received a lecture from his mom, he started to reflect and eventually apologized to me.
I'm sorry. I was taking advantage of your kindness. I'll change, I promise. Please forgive me.
Dave was deeply embarrassed. Being scolded by your mom as an adult really hits you hard. I even started to feel a little sorry for him halfway through. Maybe I had overdone it. With that thought, I accepted his apology, and from then on, Dave started doing things for himself again. A few months later, Dave's turn for surgery finally came. The operation would only take about 2 hours, but that didn't mean he'd be able to see immediately. Since the surgery was in the evening, they would remove the bandages the next day to see if his vision had improved. The surgery ended successfully, and all that was left was to remove the bandages. Finally, the moment arrived. In the hospital room, it was me and Dave's parents. The doctor entered the room, nodding to us as he walked in.
All right, I'm going to take off the bandages now.
Saying that, the doctor began unwrapping the bandages from around Dave's eyes. I moved closer to Dave, leaning in slightly so that my face would be the first thing in his line of sight. I wanted my face to be the first thing he saw. In a way, this felt like our true first meeting. The thought made me feel nervous as well. Once all the bandages were off, Dave blinked several times as if the light was too bright after such a long time. Then he raised his head and looked in my direction. "Can you see my face?"
Is that you, Nancy?
When I nodded, Dave began to cry. Seeing him shed tears of joy just from seeing my face made me so happy. At least, that's how I interpreted it. But it turned out that his tears were for a different reason.
No way. Is this some kind of joke? You're my wife? This is awful. How could you trick me like this? You're so freaking ugly.
I don't remember much after that.
You can't talk like that to someone who has supported you all this time.
I vaguely recall Dave's dad getting furious and trying to slap him, but the doctor stopped him. Apparently, since it was right after the surgery, any strong impacts was off limits. After that, somehow, I found myself back home. Looking at my phone, I saw several missed calls and voicemails. They were from Dave's mom. When I called her back, she apologized over and over.
I don't even know how to apologize properly. If you want, we'll pay compensation or agree to a divorce.
But at that moment, even I didn't know what I wanted to do. So for now, I replied to my mother-in-law with this. "It's okay. I've been used to being called ugly since I was a kid." With that, I hung up the phone. I'd been self-conscious about my looks ever since I was a child. Back in elementary school, I was constantly teased and called ugly. As I grew older, everyone matured and stopped calling me ugly to my face, but I knew they were saying things behind my back. They still thought I was ugly. They just didn't say it out loud anymore. To survive in such a cruel environment, I developed ways to cope. I would laugh off comments about my appearance to lighten the mood, or I'd take on tasks no one else wanted to do, becoming the helpful person, or rather the convenient one. Have you ever noticed? A beautiful person doesn't have to do anything to be liked, but an ugly person has to constantly try, or they'll be hated immediately. I had forgotten all about those painful memories, buried by Dave's kindness while he was blind. What should I do from here? Yes, Dave said some terrible things to me. But considering that he had just regained his vision and everything he had done for me up until now, maybe I could forgive him? At least, it didn't seem like something worth rushing into a divorce over. Or maybe I was just trying to convince myself of that. Either way, I decided to continue my marriage with Dave. After all, they say you get tired of a beautiful woman in 3 days, but you get used to an ugly one in 3 days, right? I soon realized how naive that thinking was. For a while after Dave was discharged, our married life was stable. He apologized for his harsh words at the hospital, but it seemed he still thought of me as ugly. If I needed proof, it was the fact that ever since he returned to work, he had been coming home later and later. Almost every night, he'd come back smelling of women's perfume and alcohol. At first, I thought he was just blowing off some steam now that he could see again. But after months of this, I couldn't ignore it anymore. In fact, I was almost certain he was cheating. Even though I didn't want to, I happened to see some sweet messages from women pop up on his phone. And once, I even found a hotel receipt in his suit pocket. But I couldn't confront him strongly. Because, unlike before the surgery, Dave no longer had any real reason to need me. With good looks and perfect vision, he could easily find another woman if we divorced. Meanwhile, I was still just the same unattractive, dull woman. If I let Dave go, there was no chance anyone else would marry me. I knew my thoughts were pathetically self-deprecating, but this was the reality.
Are you serious? You're just playing the tragic heroine to make yourself feel better.
That comment hit me like a ton of bricks. Maybe because it was spot on. That day, I had been venting to my coworkers about my marriage during lunch. Then one of younger colleagues, Maria, said this to me.
I can't stand it. Nancy, you're letting yourself be deceived by a man just because you think you're ugly.
The other coworkers tried to stop her, saying, "That's enough." But Maria kept going.
Nancy, you're just making excuses. Look, there are only a handful of truly beautiful women in this world. Strip off all their makeup, and most of them are ugly underneath. But despite that, they work on themselves with fashion, makeup, and sometimes even improving their minds and personalities. They put in the effort to better themselves. Have you been doing that, Nancy? If you know you're not attractive and see it as a flaw, then at least try to overcome it. Don't just sit there complaining when you haven't even tried.
I couldn't help but listen to Maria. I had always thought she was a cold, distant type, and we had hardly spoken before. However, the truth is, she's a hardworking and passionate girl. Do you think I can do it? Can I become a strong woman like Maria?
I don't know about that.
Maria responded to my words like that.
I don't think I'm particularly strong, and I don't really know you well, Nancy, but I think I can help.
Then Maria took a step closer to me and said,
Let's show your husband what he's missing.
One night, after work, Maria and I found ourselves at a bar. It was a stylish place, but the lighting was so dim that I felt a bit uneasy, especially since it was my first time in a place like that.
Relax.
Maria seemed to notice and told me to calm down. As I glanced around at the other customers, Maria made eye contact with a man. A moment later, he walked over and asked,
Wanna have a drink with me?
My heart started pounding. Not because a man approached me, but because I was nervous. After all, the man was none other than Dave. After getting a lecture from Maria, I spent the next few days learning how to do makeup from her. I had worn makeup before, but only the bare minimum, just enough to be polite. I can't find the right word to describe Maria's makeup, but the best one that comes to mind is reconstruction. I'd never used colored contacts before, and since the goal was to trick Dave, I even wore a wig. Just changing the size of my eyes and hiding my face with my hair gave me a completely different look. Maria also picked out my outfit, something I'd never normally wear. The last time I showed this much leg was probably back in elementary school sports class. And so, transformed into someone else, Maria and I followed Dave after work. Once Dave started drinking with us, the dim lighting seemed to help him not recognize me.
You must be quite the ladies' man, right?
Maria, while chatting with Dave, started asking him all sorts of questions. Are you married? How many women have you been with? How's your nightlife been lately? Those kinds of questions. Thanks to Maria acting like she was interested, Dave answered everything.
Married? Yeah, I am. That makes it even better, doesn't it? What? You don't like married guys? How many women? I've lost count. I hooked up with most of the girls in my high school sports team. Even recently, I've been with about 30 or so, maybe more. Sometimes I'm with multiple girls in one night. Tonight, I'm already adding 2 more. And as for my wife, I sleep around with lots of women, but I can't do it with her. I mean, she's so ugly. Just looking at her face kills the mood. Even taking some energy boost wouldn't help. Maybe if I put a paper bag over her head?
He was so open about everything. At this point, I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt nothing. Normally, you'd expect someone to get suspicious when asked such personal questions, but Dave was drunk and didn't seem to care. He was only focused on one thing. Then Dave dropped the big line.
Hey, why don't we go to a hotel? Have you ever had a threesome? It's fun.
I could tell Maria was starting to get irritated, but she answered, sure, and we left the bar. Once we got to the room Dave picked at the front desk, he said,
Why don't you girls take a shower first?
Maria and I replied, got it, and headed to the bathroom. Dave seemed a little curious about the 2 women showering together, but he just glanced at his phone as if to say, well, that happens sometimes. His instincts weren't wrong though. We had no intention of taking a shower. Maria was just helping me remove my makeup. A few minutes later, I approached Dave, who was lying on the bed. I'll never forget the look on his face.
Gosh, why is Nancy here?
Dave screamed when he saw me, with my wig and makeup completely gone. That's a horrible thing to say. You're the one who invited me for a threesome, I said, and Dave's confusion only grew.
Huh? What are you talking about? Not with you. There was another woman, a quiet, pretty one, right? What is this? A dream? Did I drink too much?
As he started to panic, I decided to reveal the harsh truth. Thanks for the compliment about being pretty. I've never heard that before, but sorry to disappoint you. That woman was me, with makeup and a wig.
No way.
Dave made a weird sound and then fell silent, clearly struggling to comprehend. After a few moments, he blurted out in disbelief.
What? That woman was Nancy? Wow, makeup is something else, huh? I had no idea Nancy could look so cute.
Dave, in a strange turn of events, seemed genuinely impressed by the whole experience. I never imagined Dave would actually compliment my looks. Dave, you got a smooth tongue, don't you? But flattery won't get you anything except divorce papers. I could see the color drain from Dave's face. I've got the whole conversation from the bar with Maria recorded. You've just handed me all the evidence I need for your cheating. I'll also be asking for alimony, so be ready for that. But as a small favor, I'll let you cover the hotel bills since you finally gave me a compliment. Goodbye.
Please don't do this.
Dave begged, but Maria kicked him aside. We left him in the room and walked out of the hotel. A few days later, after confronting Dave, the divorce was finalized without any issues. My parents had that "I told you so" look on their faces again, but despite everything, they still comforted me. I did feel bad that I couldn't save my marriage, especially for my in-laws who had been so supportive. But instead of blaming me, they apologized, saying, "We're really sorry." They even said, "We'll make Dave pay whatever alimony you ask for," and promised to continue supporting me. I was beyond grateful for that. As for Dave, realizing even his parents had given up on him, he looked completely crushed, but honestly, he brought it on himself. Apparently, he even lost his job. According to Dave's mom, his boss said something like,
It was one thing when you couldn't see, but now that you can, you still don't do your job, and on top of that, your behavior is terrible. We don't need someone like that here.
It seems Dave had been using his previous blindness as an excuse to slack off at work. Since that whole ordeal, Maria and I have grown closer. She told me she'd gone through something similar, which is why she pushed me to stand up for myself. But unlike me, Maria didn't just take the humiliation. She had the drive to prove those who mocked her wrong. Thanks to her, I was able to get my revenge on Dave. How could I not love someone like Maria? Now, we go shopping together on weekends, and she's teaching me how to improve myself as a woman. Of course, looks aren't everything, but being your true self isn't always the right answer either. In any case, I want to continue to learn from Maria's boldness. And maybe one day, I'll meet someone who truly loves me for who I am. That's what I think about these days.